Okay, y'all. So I had already put my closure on. So now I'm bonding tracks in. Here we go. Almost done bonding my tracks in. I'm really just skipping straight through to it. Really, because I was in a rush at this time. So much in a rush that I didn't even get to do the style that I really wanted to do, which was the layers all over, like feathers all over. So it was supposed to be a closure feathered bob. But since I was in the rush, I just did something really quick. Right here, I'm putting a track in between the closure that kind of seals it off to take away from the edges of the closure. I just never liked that look, like the edges of it. And I'm doing the other side. So this is the outcome, and I didn't get to show you guys the cutting or anything because I was so much in the rush. So all I did was cut it. I didn't know it was going to come out this good. So I didn't want to leave y'all hanging. So what I did was I did it on another client. So I said I can't leave y'all out this time. So we're gonna right here I'm using my mini hair flat iron, and the link for this will be in the description. When I tell you this gets the closure, the lace flat as ever. All right, so now we're gonna start cutting. First we're gonna comb, and I kind of like, before I cut, I separate into two. Like you see how I'm separating it into like two before I cut it. 1, 2 at the top. So at the bottom I start, and then cut again in layers at the top. So it's like I'm barely opening and closing the scissors, and I'm gliding the scissors down. I'm gonna try to explain this the best way possible. So I'm like opening and closing the scissors, like barely closing it, and I'm shredding it down, like I'm moving in a downward motion as I cut. So I'm gonna do the same thing with the top, and the reason why I do it on the top as well is it gives it a little more body when it's cut like that, as opposed to just grabbing the whole thing and cutting it all at once. So I got to give it more body, like more of a real wrap feel. I separate it in two. And I basically do the same thing. I shred. Yeah, we'll call it shredding. I shred. That's basically opening and closing the scissors and moving in a downward motion. This is the bottom part, doing the same thing. And I'm kind of sort of taking off starting where I left off. Like I'm starting to cut where I left off. I'm kind of like just doing it by eye. So I gather up another row from the back. And because the back kind of wraps towards the front when you're combing it down, I start the layers from the very first layer. I kind of measure it like that. I bring it towards the front and start to cut it the same way. Because once you start like curling and you start bumping, you want the layers, like no matter how you pull the hair, no matter where you pull the hair from, even if it's coming from the back, you want the layers to fall in place with the front. So yeah, I really hope I'm explaining this the best way. I really hope I'm explaining this to your understanding. If not, just tell me in the comments what you guys think I should, how you think I should have explained it more. Give me your input. And now I'm going to be doing the same thing with the front. Because the front is thinner, I do not separate the front into twos. It's thin enough. And I start if you look at her chin, I try to start it below her chin. So you never start the layers. I mean, unless you're going for that look, but my preference, I wouldn't start the layers above her chin. So you start down below the chin and you keep shredding, barely opening and closing the scissors and moving in the downward motion. So we're shredding. This is the next side of the back. And you guys will see why I cut the back the same way I would do the front and why I separate it. You guys can't really see the layers right now. Another thing that I do, this is my little trick, like that makes the front layers really like pop, is I go in between like every half an inch and I cut up. Like it creates like a little gap in between the cuts, and it makes it more defined for the layers. So I'm basically doing this. I'm going to do this on both sides. And I don't do this part row by row. I gather all the hair together. And then I like skip. Kind of do it by the eye to the side. And I skip and cut in between. And I basically do the same thing for the other side. If it helps for them to lean down so you can actually see the hair, or you can spread it out, that's fine too. But it also helps when their head is down. So I'm like skipping and cutting like gaps in between. You guys will see that when I curl it, it gives it more of a definition in between the layers. It's just a look that it has when you cut in between. I probably just did that because maybe I seen something that needed to be shredded. Yeah, you just got to kind of cut to the eye, to your liking. So now I'm going to start curling, and I always like start from the back, like close by the ear, like more towards the ear and the neck, the back of the neck. And I curl going towards the front really deep. So I start actually curling from the roots because that gives it body, as opposed to only curling the bottom, because the bottom will only give it a curl at the bottom. But if you put the iron closer to the scalp and start actually bending the iron from the start, it gives it more body for the look of the wrap that we want. And I do this row by row, curling downward. When you get closer to the bottom, then you can kind of bend it a little more, but still barely, because you don't want it to bend too much. You want it to have that natural look of a wrap. Now, keep in mind that an actual wrap is really when you wrap the hair around, and, you know, you can kind of sit them under the dryer with a lot of body, or, you know, some type of wrapping agent. So since we're not doing that, we want to give it a real feel of the wrap. So we want to keep the body straight through, as if it was wrapped, and as if she was wrapped and sat under the dryer. If that makes any sense to you guys. Now I'm on the other side, and I'm doing the same thing. Now, yeah, look at this. Like, if you look closely to the bottom, you see where you can see like through to her shirt in the layers, those little gaps. That was the purpose of me cutting through the gaps, to define the layers after I bump it. Yes, honey, it's giving very much Aaliyah. Very much wrapped, honey.